going to be about I guess it's a continuation of my nihilism ramble, where I talked about how people will use proportion to negate presence, where they consider their size compared to everything. And they're like, because I'm very small, I'm not important, which reveals to us the schemas that we use to gauge importance. But there's also a feature of time, which I left out. I forgot about that. How sometimes people will be like, our lives are so short, so what does it matter? We'll die eventually, or we won't live for that long. We're like a breath, or like a blade of grass instantly trimmed. And I understand that perspective because it puts things in perspective and makes you humble, and it situates you in the processes of how the world is unfolding. But I still think that sometimes when people think like that, it leads them away from life instead of leading them into further life. Instead of intensifying the moment and furthering the moment to continue on living, they use it to almost like they do this thing where it's almost like let me commit suicide while I'm young, so I'll never have to grow old and die, which is stupid because it's like they opt to like die early while living instead of just living throughout till they actually die physically and stuff, depending on whatever you believe about what happens to us after death or with death or by death, whatever, you know. So it's just one of those things. And I find the time one the most interesting in some ways because it brings up questions of like if because I think if I remember correctly, Aristotle thought of time as the essence of things, time as the natural unfolding of like how things unfold, how things work themselves out into different intelligible forms with the contents of the material, the contents of matter, the contents of the measurable, of the contents of the presencing, uh, the you know, I guess yeah. And it makes me think of how Plato, his sense of time was that the sense of change, the sense of like continuous change, things continuously changing and moving, and forms deforming or liquefying and fading away, form unforming and unforming and forming, almost like achieving a sort of emptiness, to borrow from Buddhism, well, some branches of Buddhism, like Arjuna specifically. Then time is sort of like the shadow of eternity, that there are these eternal forms, this eternal dimension of intelligibility, of this through line, of this plot that sustains the forms that emerge in the world, that is has its a substantiation by matter, a substantiation by content, basically. So it just raises lots of questions on the nature of time, and I feel like while we're living, sometimes we'll get into certain grooves or thoughts and moods where our lives seem insignificant to us, but we never actually examine the content and the form and the different schemas that we're using to make this evaluation about ourselves and to make this evaluation about life in general. So we end up making lots of fallacies, or we end up closing ourselves off to different paths of exploration or paths of unfolding or paths of consideration that can lead to more life or lead to more progression or lead to a sort of like momentary acceptance, momentary enlightenment, momentary appreciation, momentary, whatever you can say, whatever state that you can consider to be, you can evaluate it as good, evaluate it as profitable, evaluate it as substantial, as significant, as useful, as true, as accurate, these things, these different categories that we tend to opt for when it comes to how we live our lives. So that's basically my message, that I feel like people should aim to try to reason about the world in a way that gives them more life, in a way that in the way that when they're evaluating their lives and when they're evaluating the significance of their life and so on, it leads to more life, or it leads to a sort of like framing of life as beautiful, as wonderful. This is a framing of life as empty and barren and stupid and stuff like that. Because there's enough of that to go around, but you don't have to treat the whole totality as that. It's because there's a weird egotism to it too, where there's this sort of like you're saying I'm so insignificant, I'm so worthless that nothing matters, which is a stupid reasoning. It's like, why would you go from your own lack, your own deficiency, your own your own diminishment into the larger being empty, into the larger being diminished as well, into a larger being lacking potency and the larger lacking significance? Just keep to yourself. It's like it's kind of like it's almost like it's a type of suicide bombing if you think about it, or a type of like I'm gonna take you all out with me. It's just like, but people do that. It's like a living death. People they take out the whole entire world out with themselves while living. So it's like they're like basically a zombie, living a zombie in life where they're no longer vitalized and animated to live in a way that's fruitful, to live in a way that's enriching. So, and some of this comes from some alienation where they may feel divorced from life or feel out of touch, or they may feel like they're stuck in themselves, whether they're stuck in their body and a lot of pain, or stuck in their heads with psychosis or whatever. But these are extremes, and typically we tend to have beautiful, mundane things happening around us that we take for granted because we can't think of how to appreciate them. We can't think of how to explore them. We don't have a new angle into appreciating them aesthetically or appreciating them from the perspective of the sense of like, I'm glad that it took all of these moments, all the stuff that had to happen, all the stuff that has happened, all crystallized into this particular moment for me to be able to be here and to enjoy it and to draw appreciation, to draw breath, and to be able to give thanks. So I feel like that's the perspective that people should take for these things. So that's all I have to say. Thanks for listening. Let me know what you think. What do you think about how people use time, how people use proportion, how people use their own self-hatred, their own self-diminishment, self-dislike to suicide bomb everyone or suicide the whole world, like try to kill themselves to try to kill everything else, to take almost like to take vengeance on everything, or to like try to make it as if they are the totality, they're the alpha and the omega, the center. Basically, that they treat themselves as they're some sort of god, and they have some sort of absolute view from nowhere where they can judge everything as like worthy or unworthy, depending on how they are concerning it. And I feel like at best, what you can do is just speak for yourself and understand that life that we live is a patchwork of all the different patterns and richnesses and variations and spectrums and extremes you can think of. All of it is here. We have it all. We experience it all psychologically. We experience it all physically and stuff like that. Some of us, but we don't experience it all. But it's like all of it is there for us to experience. But we get a slice of it. We get a piece of it. And many people who have different pieces and stuff like that. And so it gets like a sense of like recurring patterns, recurring presences, recurring absences, recurring uh, happenstances, recurring confusions, waste, and use, um, ambience, and presence, relevance, and all these different things. And you're absolutely enough. But thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Bye bye.